Alright guys, MTech Guy here. Now I know there's a lot of you guys out there that like getting stuck in and carrying out the maintenance yourselves on your car, and there's certainly a lot of money to be saved doing it yourself, but a lot of these jobs require the car to be up in the air. So today we're going to run through the steps required to get your 1 Series BMW up in the air safely on jack stands. Now this video will apply to pretty much any 1 Series from this era, E87, E82s, they're all pretty much the same platform. Alright, so to start off with, we're going to take a look at the gear you're going to need to get your car up in the air. Alright, so to start off with, we're going to need a decent set of wheel chocks. Now we're going to use these to chock the wheels, and that's going to avoid the car trying to roll backwards and forwards when we initially get it off the ground. And then to get it off the ground, you want yourself a decent jack, and then once it's up in the air, to support it, we're going to use some axle stands. Now I've got 4 here because I'm looking to get both the front and the rear end of the car up in the air today. You might just be looking to get the front of the car up in the air, maybe you're doing an oil change, and of course you'll just need a pair of axle stands for that, but I've got 4 today for what I'm doing. Now the biggest consideration you want to make when selecting the equipment to lift and support the car is the weight of the vehicle you're looking to lift. Now the BMW 1 Series from this era, this is a 2006, they weighed approximately getting on for 1,500 kilograms, that's 1.5 tons. So the jack that we're using is rated for 2 tons, so we're not going beyond the capacity of the jack. And then if we take a closer look at the labels on the axle stands themselves, you can see these are rated 2 ton per pair, so that's obviously 1 ton per axle stand, that's the safe working load. So even if we were just using a pair to support one end of the car, maybe the front end of the car, we're well within the safe tolerance of what we're lifting because the whole car itself weighs 1.5 tons. Now not all axle stand manufacturers are the same when it comes to labelling their stands, so just make sure you double check the safe working load that's identified on the axle stand, whether it's per pair or per individual stand. Also got a couple of bits of wood here, and we'll use that just on the mouth of the jack itself there, just to stop it chewing up the parts of the car that we're pushing against. Gives it a bit of a soft buffer. Okay, so next up we'll get into the job and we'll look at where to position the jack when you lift up the car. Now most BMWs, most modern BMWs come with some lift points. See there's one there, there's 2 at the front and 2 at the rear placed on the sill of the car. Now of course we could use that to place the jack under and lift it up safely, but then you've got nowhere to put the axle stands to lower it down on. So there is another jacking point that we'll see in a moment under the front of the car in the centre. We'll be using that to jack it up, and then we'll be placing the jack stands under the lift points here. And then once we've got the front end of the car up in the air, we'll move on to the rear end. Okay, so to start off with, we're going to chock the rear wheels so the car doesn't try and roll back while we're jacking the front end of the car up. Now before we move on to the next step where we're going to lift the front end of the car up, we're going to release the handbrake. And the idea behind that is, at the moment them handbrake shoes are grabbing on to the hub, and if we lift the front end of the car now, it's likely that as the car moves upwards on an arc like this and the wheel stays where it is, you can stretch your handbrake cable. So what we're going to do is release the handbrake, and then that'll allow the body to move freely around the axle there. So now that the handbrake's released, we're relying solely on them chocks now. Alright, so we're sitting at the front end of the car here, and if we take a look underneath the front end of the car, if we move about halfway along the plastic under tray, you'll see there's a rectangle plastic pad there. Now that's what we're going to use to push against when we lift the car, so that's where we're going to jack up the car. You'll see it's positioned in the centre of that circled recess in the plastic under tray. Now what you'll often find with these 1 Series BMWs is the front end of the car does sit very close to the ground, so you'll often find that unless you've got a low profile jack, you might struggle to squeeze it under there. Now you can see I've got my jack prepared here, got my bit of wood on the lift point there so we don't damage that plastic pad under the front end of the car there. So to enable myself to get the front end of the jack under the car, I've got 2 options. You can either initially drive the car up onto some blocks of wood. So the tyres are sitting on some wood, maybe an inch or so thick, and that should give you enough room to squeeze your jack under the front end of the car. What I'm going to do is just use them lift points at the front. I'm just going to raise the car slightly and put some wood under the wheels, and then I'll get my jack under the front end of the car there. Okay, so I'm now ready to lift the front end of the car. Of course, we've got the rear wheels chocked, so we're all good to go. So I'm just going to lift the car up slightly and get some wood under them front wheels. And then same again, the other side. Okay, so there we go. The front end of the car's just lifted slightly to allow us to get our jack under that front jacking point now. So of course, like I say, two options. You can either just drive it up on some blocks of wood like I've got it here, or jack it up using them front jacking points. But of course, if you do it like the way I've just done it, make sure you've got them chocks in position at the back there. All right, so as you can see, we've got our jack positioned, just ready to lift against that plastic jacking rectangle there underneath the car. Now I've got my jack sitting on a bit of thick plywood today. Now this isn't normally necessary. The only reason I'm using this is because, as you see, my driveway is made up of cobbles. So I want the jack to be able to roll as it's lifting. So unnecessary, but if you're wondering why, that's why I'm using it. Okay, so we've got the front end high enough now to position our jack stands under the lift points there. So one there, same on the other side. So now we're ready to lower the car down onto the axle stands. Now as you lower the car, just keep one eye on the stands, come back and have a look at it if we have to, just to make sure these are still positioned in the centre of the jacking point there. And also make sure that the axle stand isn't trying to tip up any direction as you go. Okay, so now that's the front end of the car securely supported on axle stands. We'll move on to the rear of the car. Now if all you were looking to do was get the front end of the car up in the air, then just make sure that you reapply the handbrake, just to make sure them rear wheels are not only chocked but gripped with the handbrake shoes too. And it's worth applying the handbrake even if you're moving on to lift the rear of the car, because it's just going to stop the car moving about once you move away from them wheel chocks. Alright, so we're under the rear of the car now, and I've got the jack positioned where we're going to lift it. Now the rear of the car doesn't have a dedicated jacking point, so we're going to be using the differential to lift the car. Now you want to be positioning your jack just forward of the rear aluminium cover plates on the differential, so you're sitting against the iron portion of the differential and there's like a flat section underneath. So if we take a look from the rear of the car here, you can see that I've got the jack position just forward of the aluminium cover plate, so we're all clear of it. We're not going to cause any damage to the rear aluminium cover plate. We're sitting on the iron portion of the differential. So before we lift the rear end of the car up, just make sure that you've removed them front pieces of wood out the way of the front wheels, because as the car lifts up like this, you don't want to end up potentially pinching that wood and not having the full weight of the car sitting on all four stands. So just make sure they're out of the way before we lift the rear of the car up. Okay, so now the rear of the car's lifted high enough off the ground to position our axle stands underneath the lift points there. So we'll now gently lower it back down onto them. So there we have it. The car's now sitting up safely on 4 axle stands. Now before you get underneath the car to carry out any work, you want to be absolutely certain that there's no way this car's going to fall. So just double check that the car's seated correctly on the axle stands and the axle stands are seated correctly against the ground. And feel free to position some extra axle stands underneath the car just in case it slips. What I often do is reposition the jack just under the jacking point where we lifted the car, and just get it so you're not pushing the weight of the jack hard up against the car, but you're just sort of shy of that, so if it does slip you've got some extra support there. So as you can see there, I've got the jack positioned under the rear differential, but there's a tiny gap there, so I'm not pushing against it with the weight of the jack, but it's just something extra there. But any uncertainty, don't get under the car. Make sure that it's safe before you do so. Alright guys, so there we have it. That's how you go about jacking up your little 1 Series E87 or E82. If you found the video interesting or useful, don't forget to give it a like, and make sure you go and check out the rest of my YouTube channel for more BMW DIY videos. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm MTech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.